Welcome to HUD's FY2012 Continuum of Care Program NOFA and Application broadcast. My name is Ann Oliva, and I am the Director of the Office of Special Needs Assistance Programs. This is the first competition that we are administering under the rules of the Hearth Act and the new Continuum of Care Program regulations. It is incredibly important for continuums of care and project applicants to pay close attention to the materials that we are releasing, to read the Continuum of Care interim rule, and to read the NOFA in detail and fully. We have new rules and, unfortunately, a new funding reality in which we may not be able to fund all renewals nationwide. We previously taped, and it will be available on the Homelessness Resource Exchange, a specific discussion about our budget and its implications on the FY2012 competition. Mark Johnston and I taped it. It will be available for you. We urge you to please take a look at that so you can understand exactly what we're asking you to do in this competition. Before we get started, I want to make a couple of notes. We do understand, we've been receiving some questions in the help desk already about the due date for the application, which is in January. We do understand that there are projects nationwide that have January 1st start dates. Unfortunately for this year, the due date is after some of those start dates, but we will work hard to ensure that we close the gap on all of those projects and get money into the hands of successful applicants as quickly as we can. We have a lot of information to cover today, so let's get started. We have quite a group of people from the SNAP's office, starting with Laura Rout, our Deputy Director, Brian Fitzmaurice, a Division Director, Tanya Proctor, our newest Division Director, welcome Tanya, Mike Rowenhouse, Division Director, and Tracy Turner, one of our desk officers in the SNAP's office. First, we're going to look at a registration overview very quickly, just so you all know what happened in registration and some tips for next year's registration. Then we will do an overview of the program NOFA. We will look at changes and highlights for FY2012 on the Continuum of Care program. There are quite a few. Definitions and concepts and eligibility information. That is, which project applicants are eligible for the Continuum of Care program. We will look at the Continuum of Care application process and specifically talk about the Continuum of Care Consolidated Application, which is new terminology that we're using this year that encompasses the entire application that comes to HUD. We'll also review scoring. We'll look at what resources are available for you as you move through this competition period, and we'll do some closing remarks. I first want to just take a brief moment to talk about the consolidated application because this terminology is going to be used throughout the rest of the broadcast. And the consolidated application in eSNAPS is made up of three parts. The Continuum of Care application, which we used to call Exhibit 1. The collaborative applicant will provide information about the Continuum of Care planning body, its governance structure, overall performance, and the strategic planning process within the Continuum of Care. This part of the application is scored and will determine the order in which continuums of care and projects are funded. That is a very important part of the consolidated application. Then we have the project application, which was known as Exhibit 2 in previous competitions, and that's what's completed by project applicants for new or renewal project requests, including Continuum of Care planning funds. The project applicant in that application will provide a description of the proposed new or renewal project, including the details as to who the project will serve, the type of housing that will be provided, and what budget activities are being requested. The project applicant will provide a description of the activities of the planning activities that will be carried out with grant funds for planning applications. And then new this year, and we did this year to really improve system performance to make eSNAPS run faster, we have separated out the priority listing from the exhibit, what used to be called Exhibit 1 or is now called the Continuum of Care application. The priority listings contain 4 separate forms that list the new, renewal, planning costs, and UFA costs, although we'll talk about UFAs in a moment. So that continuums can prioritize in rank order all of the projects that are not rejected by the Continuum of Care. This part of the consolidated application cannot be completed until all project applications have been submitted. So first, let's do a quick overview of the registration process from 2012. The FY2012 Continuum of Care registration closed on October 1st, 2012. In order to have access to this Continuum of Care consolidated application, all COCs had to submit their registration via eSnaps. During Continuum of Care registration, continuums were notified of their annual renewal demand, which was formerly known as Hold Harmless Need, their HUD-approved preliminary pro rata need amount, the planning dollars that they are eligible to apply for, and the amount they can apply for their permanent housing bonus. Continuums were notified by HUD headquarters somewhere on or around Friday, October 19th, of the final approval or disapproval from HUD. Only those continuums that received approval will be able to access the Continuum of Care consolidated application. All continuums of care are designated as collaborative applicants this year. We did allow for continuums to apply through the registration process as Unified Funding Agencies, or UFAs. However, this year, we take this process very seriously at HUD. Identifying an organization to be a UFA means that a lot of responsibility is on that organization. And we took the process, again, very seriously. We paneled those applications. However, we did not find that any continuums met our threshold criteria. So we do not have any UFAs this year in the 2012 competition. Several of you were very close, and we expect that we will have UFAs in the FY 2013 competition. Again, approved continuums of care have access to the FY 2012 CoC Consolidated Application in eSnaps. It is important for continuums to remember that applications must be submitted, that the Continuum of Care Consolidated Application must be submitted by a representative of the Collaborative Applicants organization. We received a number of registrations from ineligible collaborative applicants. That is, it might have been submitted by a member of the Continuum of Care board rather than the collaborative applicant. So we want you all to pay close attention to who is actually submitting the Continuum of Care application this year on behalf of the Continuum. If you need to amend your applicant profile to correct the consolidated applicant, or if you need to have your Continuum of Care registration attached to a new applicant profile, please submit a request to the virtual help desk on the Homelessness Resource Exchange located at www.hudhre.info so that we can process that request. Next year, please make sure your registration is correctly submitted. We will send listserv messages, again, reminding folks, but we want you to, again, pay close attention. This was the first year, so we did expect that there were going to be some glitches there. And as we always remind people, please, please, please do not wait until the last minute to submit your application in eSnaps. I'm going to turn it over to Laura Rout now, who's going to provide an overview of the NOFA.
Thank you, Ann. And now for information on the long-anticipated FY 2012 Continuum of Care NOFA, which was issued on the HRE on Friday, November the 9th. As you know by now, there is about a little over $1.6 billion available for the Continuum of Care program this year. HUD may add to any available funds that have been carried over or recaptured from previous fiscal years to this amount. As has been mentioned many times, only the COCs that have a HUD-approved registration are eligible to submit the Continuum of Care Consolidated Application, meaning those are the only applicants that have access to the Consolidated Application and eSnaps. As a reminder, eligible project applicants for the Continuum of Care program competition are nonprofit organizations, states, local governments and instrumentalities of states and local governments, including public housing authorities. As you may remember, SNAPS issued a listserv message on Friday, October the 26th, revising the answer to a previously issued frequently asked question regarding whether or not PHAs, public housing authorities, are eligible to apply for Continuum of Care funds. It should be noted that all PHAs that meet the definition of the public housing authority in accordance to 24 CFR 5.100 are eligible to apply for CoC funding, and this includes serving as a collaborative applicant without limitation or exclusion. Here's a listing of the eligible costs for which funding can be requested for the Continuum of Care program competition. More detailed information on each item is located in sections 578.37 through 578.63 in Subpart D of the Continuum of Care program interim rule. And one note on the UFA cost. As Ann mentioned, none of the applicants met all of our thresholds. Therefore, no applicant can apply for UFA cost. Also of note, HUD will reject all requests for funds for ineligible cost. The NOFA can be found on HUD's Homelessness Resource Exchange at www.hudhre.info. Please keep in mind the following. We will be providing updates and reminders via listserv. If you are currently not receiving messages or not a member of our listserv, please visit the HUD HRE to sign up. And most importantly, the application deadline for submitting applications to HUD is at 7:59 Eastern Time on Friday, January the 18th, 2013. And I will repeat that. The competition will close at 7:59 p.m. Eastern Time on January the 18th, 2013, and that's on a Friday. There will not be any exceptions. So please submit on time. The NOFA contains 8 sections and an appendix. Section 1 is a funding opportunity description. This section contains the highlights and changes, definitions, and key concepts, and an overview of the funding opportunity. Section 2 is where you will find the requirements of the Continuum of Care Program Interim Rule at 24 CFR Part 578. And this indicates what all of the requirements that any funded grantee must be in compliance as you implement your grant. Section 3 contains the eligibility requirements or information, and we reiterate the definition of collaborative applicants and their role, and we also indicate the project applicants' roles and responsibilities. The application and submission information is found in Section 4. Discussion of the submission process and eSNAPs and content and form of application submission is also featured here. Section 5 is the application review information section where the scoring criteria is discussed. Section 6 contains the award administration information, everything that an award recipient must know. The last 2 sections, 7, agency contacts, and 8, other information, list the contacts for questions and general resources about the NOFA and competition. And as we will keep reiterating throughout this presentation, the importance of reading all of the general resources on the NOFA and the competition. Also of note, Appendix A is a list of the Continuum of Care's annual renewal demand, the annual renewal demand with a 3.5 reduction, and the final pro rata need. As mentioned earlier, it is possible the total award demand for projects submitted in the FY2012 Continuum of Care program competition will exceed the $1.61 billion available under this NOFA. And to ensure that COCs have the opportunity to prioritize their projects locally in the event that HUD is not able to fund all renewals, HUD is requesting that COCs rank projects within 2 tiers of the FY2012 competition. And we'll discuss this concept in a few slides and in another part of today's presentation. Now we'll discuss the changes and highlights for FY2012. The supportive housing program and the Shelter Plus Care projects are renewable under the Continuum of Care competition as set forward in the interim rule to continue ongoing leasing, operations, supportive services, rental assistance, HMIS, and project administration cost. Applicants that were eligible under SHP and Shelter Plus Care programs but are no longer eligible in the Continuum of Care program will continue to be eligible for renewal of leasing, operating, supportive services, rental assistance, HMIS, and project administration costs under 578.33D1, so as long as the recipient does not change the project. So what does that mean? An example of this situation would be a safe haven project. The activities continue to be eligible, but safe haven is no longer a component. So as long as the project remains in operation and there's not any changes to the project or it ceases to operate, it can continue to operate. However, if the grantee lets the grant expires, there will not be a new project awarded. So there will not be any new safe haven projects awarded under the FY2012 project competition. So if you have a safe haven and you want to continue funding, you must continue operations and not let it expire. Shelter Plus Care rental assistance funds are included under the Continuum of Care's annual renewal demand. Previously, these funds were not included in the calculation of the Continuum of Care hold harmless need amount. However, this year they are. Also note that project applicants that were approved by HUD during the registration process to change a project budget line item from leasing to rental assistance must provide a commitment letter from an entity eligible to administer rental assistance. This includes a state, a unit of local general government, or a public housing agency. Project applicants are encouraged to have the commitment letter by the application deadline. But if not, you will be required to provide it to the local HUD CPD field office after the announcement of the award and before the grant agreement can be signed. If the applicant is unable to provide a commitment, the applicant must agree to change the project back to leasing and comply with all the requirements under leasing under the Continuum of Care program, or the grant will not be renewed. Applicants must request one-year grant term. The only exception of this is new projects requesting acquisition, rehabilitation, or new construction. And those are eligible for a minimum of 3-year grant term. Where a project application includes a request for funding from acquisition, rehabilitation, and new construction, and a 1-year grant term is selected in eSNAPs, HUD will automatically increase the grant term, if awarded, to 3 years, provided that the grant would still be feasible, meaning have enough funding for 1 unit of housing or to provide services to 1 person for the entire grant term. Although the grant term may be increased, the funding request will remain the same. HUD will limit renewal grants to 1 year of funding. Renewal project applications that request multiple years of funding will be reduced to 1-year grant amounts. A renewal project's demonstrated ability to draw down and spend grant funds timely will be a factor in evaluating performance of each grant. Per 24 CFR 578.85, recipients will be required to draw project funds at least at a minimum on a quarterly basis if funded under this competition. Any substantial performance issues, such as significant delays in drawing down funds, outstanding monitoring findings, or not serving or just beginning to serve program participants, may result in a project not being funded under this competition. It should be noted that these factors are not new. For the past couple of years, we've required for grantees to draw down funds at least quarterly. That's been in everybody's grant agreement. And we've always taken into account capacity. And capacity also includes being able to manage a grant well and spending down funds, serving people that you've said. When there are issues such as outstanding monitoring findings and that there have been slow drawdowns and a lot of other factors, that was taken into account when we have rejected projects. So please make sure that you are in compliance to these requirements. HUD will allow all CoCs to reallocate renewal projects, just as we've had in the past few competitions. Difference is that all CoCs will have the ability to reduce and or eliminate funds from previous renewal projects, including renewal shelter plus care projects, to develop new permanent supportive housing projects, rapid rehousing projects, or homeless management information systems projects, HMIS. CoCs will be required to identify in the CoC Consolidated Application all projects being reduced or eliminated, along with the new projects being created. HUD strongly encourages CoCs to take advantage of this option. HUD will prioritize continuum of care serving extremely high-need communities to receive funding. To ensure HUD is targeting its resources, the department will designate 25 continuum of cares based on these criteria in the geographic area. There will be a permanent housing bonus available in this competition. Continuum of Care may submit new project applications for permanent supportive housing projects that serve chronically homeless individuals and families, with priority on serving those with the longest histories of homelessness. Up to 10% of a Continuum of Care's preliminary pro rata need is available. This amount was displayed during the Continuum of Care registration process in eSNAPs. Also, CoCs were required to submit their FY2012 housing inventory chart data and point-in-time data directly into the HUD's Homelessness Data Exchange, HDX, website on the behalf of the Continuum of Care. The deadline was April the 30th, 2012. Should be noted that Continuum of Care that did not meet the established deadline will not receive maximum number of points as described in Section 5 of the NOFA. This is the most significant change, so please pay close attention, and this won't be the only time we'll talk about the tiering of projects in today's presentation. It should be noted that Tier 1 includes all new and renewal project applications the Continuum of Care determines to be of high priority, high performing, and meet the needs and gaps as identified by the Continuum. The Continuum also needs to ensure that projects fall within the dollar amount listed in column B or C of Appendix A. Renewal projects ranked in Tier 1 that pass threshold review will be prioritized by HUD to receive funding. Projects in Tier 2 are those projects whose dollar amounts fall outside of the amount listed in column B or C of Appendix A, but within the CoC's final pro rata need amount. Given that it is possible that the total renewal demand for projects submitted in the FY2012 Continuum of Care Program competition will exceed the $1.61 billion available under this NOFA, CoCs will have the opportunity to prioritize their projects locally in the event HUD is not able to fund all renewals. HUD is requiring that CoCs rank projects within 2 tiers within this competition. The tiers are financial thresholds. Tier 1 is equal to the Continuum of Care's annual renewal demand approved in the registration process, less 3.5%. Tier 2 is the amount between a CoC's Tier 1 and the CoC's final pro rata need and any approved amounts for the Continuum of Care planning and permanent housing bonus. CoC should place all new and renewal project applications in the Continuum of Care and determine those that are high priority, again, high performing, and meet the needs and gaps as identified in Tier 1. HUD will select projects in Tier 1 in accordance with the conditional selection priorities set forth in the NOFA. This means that projects that the Continuum of Care rank lower may be selected for funding above higher ranked projects consistent with HUD's selection priorities. HUD will select all projects in Tier 1 before selecting any projects in Tier 2. Additionally, awards for all renewal projects ranked in Tier 1 will be announced first. Tier 2 is the amount, as we've mentioned before, between the Continuum of Care's Tier 1 and the continuous final pro rata need amount, in addition to, like we said, the planning and permanent housing bonus. Also, you need to continue the priority ranking from tier 1, so like 1 through 15 would be tier 1, and then if you have more than 15, tier 2 would begin with 16. So tier 1 would be 1 to 15, and then tier 2 would be, say, 16 to 30. COC should place projects that meet the needs and gaps in the COC, but may be lower performing or lower priority with the continuum of care in tier 2. Then HUD will select projects in accordance with the conditional selection priorities. HUD will only select projects from tier 2 after all projects from tier 1 have been selected. So just again, as you're thinking through, these are the things that you need to consider as you're ranking your projects. And remember that the tiers are financial thresholds. And again, we will have more information on strategies later on in the presentation. As we've had from the past several competitions, HUD will announce awards in a two-step funding announcement process. The first announcement will include renewal project applications in Tier 1 that pass threshold in the order the COC ranked them. A second announcement will include funding renewal project applications in Tier 2 that pass threshold review, as well as eligible new projects in Tier 1 and Tier 2 in the order that the CoC ranked them. Section 5 of the NOFA contains the detailed information on how HUD will select projects for funding. COCs must consult with state and local government ESG recipients within the geographic area on the plan and for allocating ESG funds and reporting on and evaluating the performance of ESG recipients and subrecipients. This is both indicated in the Continuum of Care interim rule as well as the Emergency Solutions Grant. Also, the Act requires that all communities have an HMIS that has a capacity to collect unduplicated accounts for individuals and families experience homelessness and provide information to project subrecipients and applicants for need analysis and funding priorities. Additionally, all Continuum of Care and Emergency Solution Grant recipients must participate in the local HMIS. For many communities, the inclusion of the ESG recipients and subrecipients will mean an increase of users that the HMIS must be able to accommodate. The HMIS lead should continue to consider any unique funds or needs that the HMIS may be required to address in order to accommodate these emergency shelters, street outreach, and homelessness prevention programs. Also note, COCs may request in the CoC application up to 10% of the funding awarded under this NOFA to serve families with children and youth defined as homeless under federal statute. And this can be found in the paragraph 3 of the definition of homeless found in 24 CFR 578.3. COCs are limited to using only up to 10% of the total amount awarded to the COC to serve this population and must determine which projects will be permitted to use some or all of the funding for this purpose. The only project types that can serve this population are transitional housing and supportive services only. For more information on this limitation, please see 24 CFR 576.89 and Section 5 of this NOFA. HUD continues to encourage each COC in collaboration with the HMIS lead to assess the adequacy of current funding and staffing for the HMIS. This strategic review should include a process for estimating costs associated with such items as increased participation in service providers in HMIS, either through direct data entry or by contributing data to the HMIS, including user licenses, software support, training, data quality analysis, and so forth. Enhancements to the current HMIS software is another estimated cost that you can apply. Compliance with the HMIS data standards and assessing HMIS software functionality for capacity to generate data for HUD reporting, such as APRs, the Annual Performance Report, the AHAR, and HPRP, and so forth. And now I'm passing the baton to Brian, who will provide additional information on definition and concepts and eligibility info.
Thank you, Laura. I will start by reviewing some of the major definitions and concepts as contained in the CoC interim rule. Centralized or coordinated assessment system is a process designed to coordinate program participant intake, assessment, and provision of referrals. Such system covers the geographic area, is easily accessed by individuals and families seeking housing or services, is well advertised, and includes a comprehensive and standardized assessment tool. This definition establishes the basic minimum requirements for the Continuum centralized or coordinated assessment system. Next, the Collaborative Applicant, which is being talked about quite a lot today. The Collaborative Applicant is the entity designated by the CoC to submit the registration and application in the CoC program competition on behalf of the CoC. The Collaborative Applicant is responsible for the coordination and oversight of the CoC planning efforts and has the authority to certify and submit the CoC Homeless Assistance Funding application. This entity was formerly known as the CoC Lead Agency. Permanent housing is community-based housing without a designated length of stay. Includes permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. To be permanent housing, the program participant must be the tenant on a lease for a term of at least 1 year, which is renewable for terms that are a minimum of 1 month long and is terminable only for cause. Permanent supportive housing is permanent housing in which supportive services are provided to assist homeless persons with a disability to live independently. Some further definitions and concepts. A project is a group of eligible activities identified as a project in an application to HUD for CoC funds. For example, a structure or structures that is acquired, rehabilitated, constructed, or leased with assistance provided under the CoC rule or with respect to which HUD provides rental assistance or annual payments for operating costs or supportive services. The project applicant is an applicant designated by the CoC to apply for CoC program funds to carry out activities related to specific projects. This includes collaborative applicants that apply for CoC planning funds. Rapid rehousing, supportive services, and or short or medium-term tenant-based rental assistance to help homeless participants with or without disabilities move as quickly as possible into permanent housing. Permanent housing bonus, PH bonus. The new permanent supportive housing project that serves chronically homeless individuals and families with priority on serving those with the longest histories of homelessness in an amount up to 10% of the CoC's preliminary pro rata need. The 10% cap on the PH bonus was communicated via the CoC registration process in eSNAPs. PH bonus projects that meet the eligibility and project quality thresholds in the CoCs with a minimum score of 97 points will be conditionally awarded before other types of new projects as established under Section 5 of the NOFA. Reallocation is where a CoC opts to shift funds in whole or part from existing renewal projects to create one or more permanent supportive housing projects, rapid rehousing projects, or dedicated HMIS projects. Even if the CoC does not receive the minimum score of 97 to have new projects funded as detailed in the NOFA, the new projects created by reallocation will be conditionally funded for other types of new projects so long as they meet the NOFA eligibility and project quality thresholds. New projects created by reallocation that do not meet the NOFA eligibility and project quality thresholds will be rejected. Please keep that in mind. So let's move on to eligibility information. And this is contained under Part 578.15 of the CoC interim rule. As previously discussed by Laura, eligible project applicants include nonprofit organizations, states, local governments, and instrumentalities of states and local governments, including public housing authorities, PHAs. For-profit entities are not eligible to apply. Let's go over some additional eligibility requirements for renewal projects. Any SHP or shelter plus care grant awarded in a preceding competition that expires in calendar year 2013. Again, that's through January 1st through December 31st, 2013. Also includes any projects funded in 2008 under the Rapid Rehousing Demonstration Program that are expiring in 2013. Further, any shelter plus care grant award prior to 2002 for which funding is expected to run out in calendar year 2013 and which has never applied for renewal funding. Any SHP or shelter plus care grant originally awarded in the 2006 competition and notwithstanding the expiration date that has funds expiring in 2013 or later and has not been renewed in a previous competition must apply this year. Funds for these grants, these 2006 grants, will no longer be available after September 30th, 2013. The 2006 Appropriations Act requires that 2006 awards are available for disbursement up to, but no later than September 30th, 2013. And LOCKSS requires that all draws for any such grants must be made no later than September 26, 2013. So a couple days prior to the actual end of that availability, those awards, those draws must be made in the LOCKSS system. Funds from these grants remaining after September 30th, 2013 will be recaptured and returned to the U.S. Treasury and will no longer be available for expenditure, even if the expiration date in the grant agreement is beyond September 30th, 2013. Recipients may not accelerate their spending rate to spend down funds prior to September 26, 2013. Field offices will monitor draws for affected grants to assure that funds will be drawn only to reimburse the affected recipients for actual costs incurred in accordance with the project budget on or before the LOCKSS availability of funds deadline. Grants awarded in the 2006 competition are not eligible for renewal in the 2012 competition if they expired or are expiring in calendar year 2012, this year, that is from January 1st to December 31st, 2012, and were not renewed in a previous competition or not approved for an extension into calendar year 2013. As in the past, HUD continues to encourage the consolidation of appropriate renewal grants where you have the same grantee, the same component, and the grants expire in the same year. For projects that have not yet been consolidated, they must submit separate project applications this year for renewal, for individual renewal grants, as reflected on the 2012 Grant Inventory Worksheet, the GIW. Where a grantee wants to consolidate these individual renewals coming in 2012, this can be accomplished with the field office at the point of renewal grant execution in calendar year 2013. Let's talk about new projects now and the initial terms that may be requested. The initial terms for new project applications may be 1 through 5 years or 15 years with some exceptions, and we'll go over these different options. An exception to the initial term for new projects. Any new project application that includes leasing costs, either leasing alone or leasing costs plus other costs, for example, supportive services, HMIS, etc., can only request up to a 3-year grant term with funding for 3 years. Any of the following new projects can request 1 through 5-year grant terms for funding for the same number of years. That would be for operating, supportive services only, HMIS, and project administration. Any new project applications that request new construction, acquisition, or rehabilitation must request a minimum of a 3-year grant term and request up to a 5-year grant term. Any new project application requesting project-based rental assistance, sponsor-based rental assistance, or operating costs may request up to a 15-year grant term. However, it may only request up to 5 years of funds. So you must be aware of that distinction there between the term and the funds that they can request to this new application. Funding for the remainder of the term, if they go for a 15-year term, is subject to appropriations availability, and applicants must apply for additional funds at such time and such manner as HUD may require. For capital costs, that would be new construction, acquisition, or rehabilitation, the new project term will be 3 years, on top of the time necessary to acquire the property, complete construction, and begin operating. For such hard costs, the recipient must operate the housing or provide supportive services for at least 15 years as required by executing and recording a HUD-approved Declaration of Restrictive Covenants. In order to expend funds within the statutorily required deadlines, applicants funded for sponsor-based or project-based rental assistance must execute the grant award and begin providing rental assistance within 2 years. However, HUD strongly encourages all rental assistance to begin within 12 months. Applicants that are unable to begin rental assistance within the 12-month period should consult with the local field office for assistance. I will now turn it over to Tanya, who will discuss match and other project eligibility requirements.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to start talking about match. In Section 578.73 of the Continuum of Care interim rule provides the information regarding match. The recipient or subrecipient must match all grant funds except for leasing funds with no less than 25% of funds or in-kind contributions from other sources. For Continuum of Care geographic areas in which there is more than one grant agreement, the 25% match must be provided on a grant-by-grant basis. The sole recipient for the continuum may provide the match on the continuum-wide basis. Cash sources. A recipient or subrecipient may use funds from any source, including any other federal source, excluding the Continuum of Care program funds, as well as state, local, and private sources, provided that funds from the sources are not statutorily prohibited to be used as match. The recipient must ensure that any funds used to satisfy the matching requirements of this section are eligible under the laws governing the funds in order to be used as matching funds for a grant award under this program. In-kind contributions. The recipient or subrecipient may use the value of any real property, equipment, goods, or services contributed to the project as match, provided that if the recipient or subrecipient had to pay for them with grant funds, the cost would have been eligible under Subpart D. The requirements of 24 CFR 84.23 and 85.24 applies. The in-kind contribution needs to be documented with the MOU. Project applicants must meet all statutory and regulatory requirements in the Continuum of Care Program interim rule and the general section of the NOFA. HUD will not consider an application from an ineligible project applicant, including an application for Continuum of Care planning funds from an applicant other than the collaborative applicant. All project applicants seeking funding under this NOFA must have a DUNS number and must type that number into the SF424, which is submitted as the applicant profile with the project application and eSnaps. All project applicants seeking funding under this NOFA must have an active SAMS registration. SAM stands for System for Award Management. Now, this system has replaced the Central Contractor Registration, also known as the CCR. To get started, please access the SAMS website at www.sam.gov. HUD will review all projects to determine if they meet the following eligibility threshold requirements as a pass-fail standard. If HUD determines that the applicable standards are not met for a project, the project will be rejected from the competition. Any project requesting renewal funding will be considered as having met these standards through its previously approved grant application unless information to the contrary is received. Project applicants and potential subrecipients must meet the eligibility requirements of the Continuum of Care program as described in the interim rule. Project applicants and potential subrecipients must demonstrate the financial and management capacity and experience to carry out the project as detailed in the project application and to administer federal funds. Demonstrating capacity may include a description of the applicant subrecipient's experience with similar projects and with successful administration of other federal funds. Project applicants must submit the required certification as specified in the NOFA. The population to be served must meet program eligibility requirements as described in the Act. The project application must clearly establish eligibility of program applicants. This includes the following additional eligibility criteria for certain types of projects. The only person to be served by any permanent supportive housing project are those who come from streets, emergency shelters, safe havens, or transitional housing. Persons going into permanent supportive housing who are coming from transitional housing must have originally come from the streets or emergency shelters. Disabled individuals and families who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking and are living in transitional housing are eligible for permanent supportive housing even if they didn't live in the streets, emergency shelters, or safe havens prior to entry in transitional housing. Persons exiting institutions where they reside for 90 days or less and came from the streets, emergency shelters, or safe havens immediately prior to entering the institution are also eligible for permanent supportive housing. Projects funded under the permanent housing bonus must exclusively serve 100% chronically homeless individuals and families. Transitional housing and supportive services only projects may be eligible to use up to 10% of the total Continuum of Care funds to serve persons defined as homeless under other federal definitions. However, the Continuum of Care must be approved by HUD as outlined in the NOFA. Projects must be cost-effective, including costs associated with construction, operations, and supportive services. Costs should not deviate substantially from the norm and the locale for the type of structure and kind of activities. Project applicants must agree to participate in the local HMIS system. However, project applicants that are victim service providers are prohibited from entering into the local HMIS as required by the Violence Against Women Act of 2005. Legal service providers may use a comparable database provided it meets the standards of the local HMIS, only when necessary to protect client-attorney privilege. HUD will review new project applications to determine if they meet the following requirements with clear and continuing evidence. Any project requesting renewal funding will be considered as having met these requirements through previously approved grant applications. HUD will assess the following: type and scale of need and accessibility to community amenities, type and scale of supportive services and mode of transportation to services, whether the specific plan for ensuring clients will be individually assist to obtain the benefits of mainstream health, social, and employment programs for which they are eligible to provide. Housing program participants help to obtain and remain in permanent housing. How program participants increase their income and live independently. Satisfactory capacity of applicant, draw down the performance of existing grants, justification for expansion projects, and timeliness standards. HUD also reserves the right to withdraw funds if no annual performance report is submitted on the prior grant. Project eligibility threshold for renewal projects. HUD will assess the following: the project applicant's performance against plans and goals established in the initial application as amended. Project applicants must demonstrate all timeliness standards for grants being renewed, including that standards for the expenditures of grant funds. The project applicant's performance is assisting program participants to achieve and maintain independent living and record of success, except for HMIS dedicated projects, and capacity noncompliance, evidence that a project applicant has been unwillingly to accept technical assistance, has a history of inadequate financial accounting practices, has indications of project mismanagement, has a drastic reduction in the population served, has made program changes without prior HUD approval, or has lost a project site, which may result in rejection of the application from the competition. HUD reserves the right to reduce or reject a funding request from the project applicant for the following reasons: outstanding obligation to HUD that is in arrears, or for which a payment schedule has not been agreed upon, audit findings for which a response is overdue or unsatisfactory, history of inadequate financial management accounting practices, evidence of untimely expenditures on prior awards, history of other major capacity issues that have significantly impact the operations of the project and its performance, timeliness in reimbursing subrecipients for eligible costs, history of serving eligible persons, expending grant funds on ineligible costs, or failing to expend funds within statutory established timeframes. In order for a project application to be considered for rating and ranking by HUD, the project applicant and the proposed subrecipient must meet the civil rights threshold requirements in Section 3C2D of the FY2012 General Section of the NOFA. For each applicant that is not a state or unit of local government, the applicant must submit a certification by the jurisdiction in which the proposed project will be located that the applicant's application for funding is consistent with the jurisdiction's approved consolidated plan. The certification must be made in accordance with the provisions of the Consolidated Plan Regulations at 24 CFR Part 91, Subpart F. The HUD 2991 form must be used and must list all new and renewal projects within the jurisdiction that are consistent with the Consolidated Plan. For a project applicant that is a state or unit of local government, the jurisdiction must certify that it is following its HUD-approved consolidated plan. All completed forms, along with the priority listings, must include the Continuum of Care's application and eSNAPs. New or renewal projects requesting funds in FY2012 that are not included on the HUD 2991 form will not receive a conditional award. I am now turning this over to Mike, and he's going to discuss the Continuum of Care Consolidated Application.
Thank you, Tanya, and hello, everybody. The CoC Consolidated Application is comprised of 3 parts. The CoC application was known as Exhibit 1 in the past competitions. The collaborative applicant will provide information about the CoC planning body, governance structure, overall performance, and the strategic planning process. This part of the application is scored and will determine the order in which CoCs are funded. The CoC priority listing contains 4 separate forms that lists the new, renewal, and CoC planning projects that the CoC intends to submit for consideration for funding, including ranking information as well as any projects rejected by the CoC. This part of the CoC Consolidated Application cannot be completed until all project applications have been submitted. The project application, known as Exhibit 2 in past competitions, is completed by project applicants for new and renewal project requests. The project applicant will provide a description of the proposed new or renewal project, including the details as to who the project will serve, the type of housing that will be provided, and what budget activities are being requested. In an effort to enhance system performance, the CoC application and the CoC priority listings have been separated into 2 separate submissions. All collaborative applicants should see an improved process, especially when it comes to the project listings that in the past could take hours depending on the number of projects. The project priority listing is considerably faster and easier. The collaborative applicant must ensure that both the CoC application and the CoC project listings are submitted in eSNAPs prior to the submission deadline to HUD. In past application processes, the CoC application detailed instructions and priority listing instructions were found in eSNAPs on the left-hand menu page. New this year, all instructions and training documents for the CoC application and priority listing are located in one place on HUD HER website on the eSNAPs competition training site, CoC Training. Collaborative applicants should closely review and refer to these documents during the local application process, as they were designed to assist you in completing the application and priority listings. Now let's turn to application scoring. The CoC application will be scored on a 130-point scale. The CoC application must receive a minimum score of 97 points in order for new projects to receive funding consideration based on available funds. As in the past, HUD is informing COCs of the total available score for each part of the CoC application. New in 2012, HUD is further breaking down the scoring for each of the parts based on the areas of the application that will be scored and what the score will be for that area. As you read through the fiscal year 2012 CoC Program NOFA, Section 5, you will not only see the overall score for each of the part of the application, but you will also see the possible maximum score breakdown for each area within each part. It is important to note that in order to receive the maximum score for each section within the part, the collaborative applicant must fully and completely answer the questions asked. This is the scoring breakdown for the different areas of the CoC application. It is important to note that the actual CoC application in eSNAPS has the same look as in the past applications. So Part 1 includes CoC housing, services, and structure. Part 2 includes homeless management information system and point-in-time data. Part 3 includes CoC strategic planning, and Part 4 includes the CoC performance. Leveraging is calculated based on the leveraging amounts that are reported in each of the project applications that are attached to the CoC Consolidated Application through the project listing. Turning to the individual scoring segments, HUD will award a total of 34 points based upon the CoC's progress in reducing homelessness in its geographical area, as well as decreasing the number of recurrences of homelessness, including chronic homelessness. As found in Section 427B1A of the Act, CoCs will be evaluated on previous performance regarding homelessness, including performance for projects funded through the Emergency Solutions Grant Program in the geographical area. HUD will award a minimum score of half of the full points available in this section to CoCs with projects that have been impacted by a major disaster as declared under Title IV of the Robert T. Stafford Act. These CoCs in areas affected should notify HUD in writing prior to the close of the CoC program competition. HUD will award a total of 55 points based upon the CoC's strategic planning processes within this geographical area. As found in Section 427B1B of the Act, CoCs will be evaluated on the level of strategic planning carried out within the claimed geographical area. The items are as follows: reduction in the number of individuals and families who become homeless, reduction in the length of time individuals and families remain homeless, collaboration with local educational authorities, addressing the needs of all relevant subpopulations, comprehensive strategies for reducing homelessness, setting quantifiable performance measures and timelines for completion, coordination and/or assisting with discharge planning. HUD will award up to 14 points for CoCs based on the extent to which a CoC demonstrates the existence of a coordinated, inclusive, and outcome-oriented community process, including an organizational structures and decision-making process for developing and implementing a CoC strategy, is inclusive of representatives from both the private and public sectors, has a fair and impartial project review and selection process, and has created, maintained, and built upon a community-wide inventory of housing for homeless individuals and families. HUD will award up to 6 points to COCs that demonstrate the extent to which the amount of assistance to be provided to the COC will be supplemented with resources from other public and private resources, including mainstream programs. COCs that have 100% participation leveraging from all project applications, including only those communities that have commitment letters on file that are dated within 60 days of the CoC application submission date to HUD, and that have at a minimum 150% leveraging, will receive the maximum points. HUD will award up to 13 points to COCs that clearly demonstrate a functioning HIMS that facilitates the collection of information on homeless individuals and families using residential and other homeless services and stores that data in electronic form. HUD will award up to 8 points to COCs related to the collection, use, and submission of 2012 point-in-time count data. Maximum points be awarded to COCs that conduct both a sheltered point-in-time count and an unsheltered point-in-time count during the last days of January 2012. Successfully submitted the information in HDX by April 30th, 2012 submission date, and clearly demonstrate how the information obtained during the count was used for local planning purposes. The point-in-time counts assist communities and HUD towards understanding the characteristics and the numbers of persons who are homeless. 2 bonus points are available where 100% of the project applications request 7% or less in project administration costs. Per the CoC Program interim rule, project applicants may request up to 10% administrative costs. However, in order for the CoC application to receive those 2 bonus points, the administration cost request must be 7% or lower. 2 bonus points are available where 100% of new project applications, including those created through CoC's remaining PPRN under the permanent housing bonus or through reallocation, propose to serve chronically homeless individuals and families. To receive the maximum number of bonus points, these projects should also demonstrate how they will prioritize the highest need chronically homeless individuals and families that have either been homeless continuously for 1 year or whose episodes cumulatively total 1 year or more. 24 CFR 578.35D provides that subject to an appeal process, if one or more CoC claims the same geographical area, HUD will award funds to the collaborative applicant whose application has the highest overall score. Projects from the lower rated CoC will not be awarded funds. There were no dual claims this year, so this provision will not be implemented in the 2012 CoC competition. As Laura introduced in the Changes and Highlights section, CoCs are required to rank projects in tiers this year. The tiers, again, are financial thresholds. Tier 1 is equal to the CoC's annual renewal demand, ARD, approved in the registration process, less 3.5%. Tier 2 is the amount between a CoC's Tier 1 and the CoC's final pro rata need and any approved amounts for CoC planning and the PH bonus. CoCs should place all new and renewal project application the CoCs determines are high priority, high performing, and meet the needs and gaps as identified by the CoC in Tier 1. HUD will select projects in Tier 1 in accordance with the conditional selection priorities set forth in the NOFA. This means that projects that the CoC ranked lower may be selected for funding above higher ranked projects consistent with HUD selection priorities. HUD will select all projects in Tier 1, I repeat, HUD will select all projects in Tier 1 before selecting any projects in Tier 2. Additionally, awards for all renewal projects ranked in Tier 1 will be announced first. Turning to Tier 2. Tier 2 again is the amount between the CoC's Tier 1 and the CoC's final pro rata need in addition to any amounts approved for CoC planning and the PH bonus. CoCs will continue the priority ranking from Tier 1, i.g. if a CoC had 15 projects in Tier 1, then the priority rating for Tier 2 will begin with project 16. CoCs should place projects that meet the needs and gaps of the CoC, but may be lower performing or lower priority to the CoC in Tier 2. Then HUD will select projects in accordance with the conditional selection priorities. HUD will only select projects from Tier 2 after all projects from Tier 1 have been selected. Projects submitted completely outside the Tier 1 threshold will be automatically rejected by HUD. This slide again presents the elements of the definitions of Tier 1 in a matrix and also highlights the amount of funds available in each tier for prioritization. This slide takes the tiering concepts and applies them to a hypothetical CoC-A example. CoC's A's registration resulted in the following data to be used in tiering. The CoC had a preliminary pro rata need of $200,000. The annual renewal demand was $100,000. The final pro rata need, therefore, is $200,000. The PHA bonus was $20,000. And the planning allocation was $10,000, which was the minimum available to each CoC. The Tier 1 threshold for this CoC is $96,500, calculated by reducing the ARD by the 3.5% adjustment. The funds available in Tier 1 for prioritizing projects is therefore $96,500. The Tier 2 threshold is $230,000 and is calculated by adding the CoC's final pro rata need of $200,000 and the PH bonus of $20,000 and the planning allocation of $10,000. The funds available in Tier 2 is calculated by subtracting the Tier 1 threshold amount of $96,500 from the Tier 2 threshold of $230,000. Thus, the funds available in Tier 2 for prioritizing projects is $133,500. Once again, projects that are submitted by the CoC that are outside the CoC's Tier 2 threshold will be rejected by HUD. In this example, any projects submitted by the CoC that are beyond the Tier 2 threshold of $230,000 will be rejected by HUD. Regarding this selection criteria, HUD will select projects in order of the selection priorities, and within each selection priority by CoC score, and for each CoC in order of the priority listing until there are no more available funds. For each selection priority, HUD will select all the projects for a higher scoring CoC in order of the CoC's priority listing before selecting projects from the next highest scoring CoC in order of that CoC's priority listing. HUD will move down through the CoCs by CoC score before continuing to the next selection priority or until there are no more available funds. In order to have new projects selected, the CoC must receive a score of 97 or above. New projects created through reallocation are exempt from this 97-point minimum requirement. This slide contains the selection criteria for Tier 2. Some final thoughts in conclusion on our discussion of this section. The shortfall in this year's funding requires CoCs to make tough choices, to understand the risks and benefit of various choices for prioritizing renewals, a planning project, and other new projects, and sizing your project's administrative costs. Having a thorough understanding of these concepts will affect your success in obtaining funding this year. These are your dollars, bucks, lucre, and in the pirate lore of old, your booty. You must understand the convergence of the tiering concepts, the prioritization concepts, the ranking of CoCs, the reallocation rules, and the budgeting rules if you are to successfully implement the CoC's strategic choices in this year's CoC competition. There will be additional detailed training on these concepts, and be sure to take the training and study your options carefully. If you understand these concepts thoroughly, you will have the best chance of protecting, as they say in pirate lore of old, your booty in this year's competition. Now, we're going to turn over the next section to Tracy on project information.
Thank you, Mike. Now we're going to talk about project application. The most important change this year in the project application is that there will be no importing of data from fiscal year 2011. eSNAPS is improved this year, however, to provide more efficiency and speed. SNAPS has created training modules to assist you through the application process. Please visit the HUD HRE to access the applicable training module for your project. Available after the applicant profile is completed, you will select your project type and your CoC program component type. These selections will drive the visibility of the forms that you will need: PH, TH, SSO, HMIS, planning, or safe haven. The project applicant will need to complete the project application for funding to operate a housing or service project for homeless individuals or families. A project applicant must also submit standard form SF424, the application for federal assistance form, along with the project application. Both the FS424 and project application are available on eSNAPS while the competition is open. A subrecipient responsible for carrying out the proposed project activities does not submit an SF424 or project application unless it is also the project applicant. For example, if applicant incorrectly selects leasing instead of rental assistance, the form completed will not be sufficient for HUD to fully access the project for funding. And for bonus projects, applicants will select PH and select yes that it is a bonus project. Applicants can do the following until the project application is submitted to the CoC. They can make changes and corrections. For example, you don't have to complete the project application all at one time, but you can do a portion, save at a later date, go back into the project application, and complete at your leisure. You will be able to do this until you submit the project application. Rapid Rehousing for Families and Demonstration Program. It was originally funded in fiscal year 2008. Former SHP-TH 3-year grant terms. It was funded to provide leasing up to 18 months, supportive services, admin costs, projects that are expiring in calendar year 2013 must have been reflected on the GIW. Renew funding in the fiscal year 2012 CoC competition. Rapid Rehousing was implemented for households with dependent children residing on the street or in emergency shelters, as directed by Congress in the Consolidated Appropriation Act for 2008. These projects were originally funded under the 2008 competition and were required to be administered in accordance to the requirements of the SHP Transitional Housing Component, with the exception that the eligible activities are limited to administration, leasing up to 18 months, and supportive services. All selected projects were required to have a grant term of 3 years. Therefore, projects with grant agreements that are expiring in calendar year 2013 may be eligible to receive renewal funding in this year's competition. Please also note that you must apply as a TH project, leasing only, and not rental assistance. You must also come in as originally awarded. New projects and renewal projects. Project applicants must be eligible to apply for the CoC program. Project quality is applied to new applications only. Project applicants and project sponsors must demonstrate the ability to carry out the projects. With respect to each proposed project, this means that in addition to knowledge of and experience with homelessness in general, the organization carrying out the project, its employees, or its partners must have the necessary experience and knowledge to carry out the specific activities proposed, such as housing development, housing management, and service delivery. If a project applicant or the project sponsor, also known this year as the subrecipient, is a current or past recipient of assistance under the HUD McKinney-Vento Act program, there must have been no delay in meeting applicable program timeliness standards. Unless, of course, that HUD determines that the delay in the project implementation was beyond the applicant's or the project subrecipient's control. There are no serious unresolved HUD monitoring findings, that there are no outstanding audit findings of a material nature regarding the administration of the program, or that neither the project applicant or the project subrecipients have been placed on the federal disbarment or suspensions list. Consolidations for rental assistance renewal projects. HUD encourages the consolidation of appropriate rental assistance renewal projects when the grants are under the same grantee, have the same component, and expire in the same year. However, renewal requests for expiring rental assistance grants that were not combined on the GIW should submit separate project applications as individual renewal grants. Where the grantee wishes to consolidate the renewal grants, this action will be subsequently accomplished by the field office at the point of renewal grant agreement execution. All new and renewal projects. All projects must include measures for length of time in project, returns to homelessness, movement to and stability in permanent housing, job and income growth. Applicant may indicate additional measures to chart success. Renewals. Budget line items and annual renewal amount, ARA, should match the amount on the final HUD approved GIW. The budget amounts and unit configuration finalized in the GIW will establish the maximum amount that may be requested in the project applications in eSNAPs. Another reminder is that first-time rental assistance renewals that request more units than on the grant agreement must be documented in an approved GIW. Now we're going to talk about attachments. Here is a listing of the attachments that need to be submitted with the application. Regarding the Code of Conduct, A project applicant for funding under this announcement is prohibited from receiving an award of funds from HUD if it fails to meet this requirement for a code of conduct. A project applicant who previously submitted an application and included a copy of its code of conduct will not be required to submit another copy if the applicant has already uploaded a copy into eSnaps, or if it is listed on HUD's website. A project applicant not meeting these requirements must attach a copy of its code of conduct with its fiscal year 2012 project application. A project applicant must also include a copy of its code of conduct if the information listed on the website has changed, such as the person who submitted the previous application is no longer your authorized organization representative, or if the organization has changed its legal name or merged with another organization, or if the address of the organization has changed. See Section 3.C5.I of the Fiscal Year 2011 General Section for additional information on Code of Conduct requirements. The PHA letter is documentation of the agreement of a PHA to administer the rental assistance. I am now going to turn it over to Ann to close.
Thanks, Tracy. And thanks to all of the SNAP staff on the broadcast today. This is a complicated process, and we hope that we got you the information that you need to make good decisions at the local level. I know that this FY2012 competition really reflects a lot of changes, both in the Continuum of Care regulations and in our budget situation. And it is going to be a challenge both for us at the national level and for you at the local level. But as we talked about earlier in this presentation and in the presentation that was recorded and is available for you that Mark Johnston and I did, the reason that we're providing the kind of detail that we are this year is because we want to be as transparent as possible in this process so that all of our continuums can make the smartest choices for their areas that they can. And I hope that all of you take advantage of the information that we are putting out so that you can make those smart and strategic choices at the local level. So again, as we always end these broadcasts, I want to thank all of you that are out there, our Continuum of Care leadership, our stakeholders, and our grantees for all of the work that you do on a daily basis to serve people who are homeless in our communities. Thank you.